By the year 3147, war was a myth. Children on Earth learned of it like they did dragons or magic. Curious, terrifying, ancient. Soldiers were museum relics. Weapons existed only in locked archives, studied by historians the way archaeologists studied fossils. Humanity had transcended it, not through domination, but through exhaustion. After the final conflicts of the 27th century, humanity had unified, not out of ideology, but necessity. War had almost unmade them. Peace had simply been all that was left. For 800 years they flourished. Terraforming projects reshaped Mars into green valleys and sapphire lakes. The rings of Saturn hosted orbital cities. The first extrasolar colonies glittered around Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. AI governed with transparency and consent, bound by the covenant of sentient equilibrium, a pact of partnership between machine and mind. Disease was extinct, poverty abolished. The last warship was mothballed in 2942, rusting in the Kuiper graveyard. Humanity had forgotten how to hate. And so, when the alien ships arrived, humanity didn't recognize the shape of invasion. It began with a ripple, a series of odd disappearances, probes near Proxima Centauri vanishing midstream, relay beacons going dark, an unresponsive mining station orbiting Gliese 581c. At first, it was blamed on magnetic storms, then software faults, then quiet concern. By the time the Daedalus Array lost contact with the Tau Ceti colonies, the Terran Synthesis Council convened in emergency quorum, something that hadn't occurred in over 4 centuries. The President of Earth, Aisha Kalem, stood in the Geneva Sky Chamber, her voice strained but calm. "We do not jump to conclusions," she said. "The universe is vast and mysterious. Let us remain in inquiry, not fear." 2 days later, humanity's oldest outpost, New Carthage, broadcast one final desperate message. A single word: run. Then silence. They came through the Eridani Drift in ships shaped like glass daggers and living bone. The Eliari Imperium, an ancient empire of conquest and ritualistic annihilation. They had watched humanity grow from afar, fascinated by its peace, disgusted by its passivity. To them, war was not failure, it was order. Peace was decay. The Eliari didn't send emissaries, they didn't make demands. Their doctrine was older than Earth's sky. To conquer is to bring clarity, and so they began to erase. New Carthage fell in 8 hours. All sentience purged, orbital cities shattered. The Eliari method was precise. Strike hard, leave ruins, move on. Psychological warfare by example. The message was clear: remember war, or die. The Terran Council was paralysed. There was no military, no weapon stockpiles. AI defence matrices had been retooled for climate and logistics. Humanity's orbital fleets were research vessels, not combat craft. There were no generals, only scientists, engineers, thinkers, peacemakers, and one historian. Dr. Mira Quaid, Professor of Pre-Unity Conflicts at Europa Academy, sat alone in a vault beneath Olympus Mons, surrounded by old data slates, rusted rifles, and nuclear schematics. "They're using invasion patterns identical to the Narok Crusades," she said, speaking to no one in particular. "Same fleet dispersal, same psychological pressure. They don't want resources, they want submission through fear." No one had listened when she published War as Ritual, Alien Doctrines of Galactic Dominion 2 decades prior. It had been dismissed as speculative anthropology. Now it was gospel, and there were no disciples, but there was one hope. Buried beneath Titan's methane ice, hidden for 1,200 years, was Project Svalin, a classified contingency initiative from the 29th century, long considered obsolete and unnecessary. It was a myth passed between old AI cores like a bedtime story, that should war ever return, Earth had prepared one final shield, a single warship, not launched, not tested, not activated, designed only in theory by post-war engineers who believed that even utopia needed an if all else fails. Her name was Svalin, after the Norse shield that protected the world from the sun, and now she would protect humanity from a darkness they had dared to forget. When the retrieval team unearthed her, the ship's AI core activated on contact. "Threat detected," it said coldly. "Humanity compromised. Deploying countermeasure doctrine 01. Recalibrating memory protocols. Welcome back to war. The bridge was a cathedral of silence, empty, dark, carved with symbols few remembered. But when the engines came alive, lighting up the moon's surface with a white flare of awakening, Earth turned its eyes upward again. This time, not to dream, but to defend. Peace had made humanity kind. Now war would remind them how to be terrifying. It took 6 days to bring Svalin online. 6 days of feverish work by the best minds Earth could find. Engineers who had never seen a weapon, biologists repurposed as systems analysts, AI ethicists scrambling to relearn how to wage war. Their hands trembled as they linked cables and reinitialized code that hadn't been touched in over a millennium. Most of it was beyond them. Svalin had been built by minds closer to myth than memory. No one had expected to ever use her. She wasn't a ship. She was a prophecy. Dr. Mira Quaid stood alone in the central command spire, staring at the throne-like command cradle at the core of the ship. It didn't look like a seat. It looked like a judgment. Titanium bones, neural interface cables, padded only by necessity, not comfort. It pulsed with latent potential, waiting for a mind to interface. The cradle would not accept AI. That had been the cost of Svalin's construction. In the ashes of the final war, humanity had agreed. If ever a weapon of ultimate design were built again, it must be human-controlled. Only flesh and memory could choose when to burn the stars. The AI of the ship, designation SVN1, could advise, react, but not decide. That was the burden. That was the price. "I won't let you destroy yourself," said the voice of Councillor Nirin from the main holoscreen. "You're not a soldier. You're a historian." Mira turned, her eyes hollow from sleepless days. "Exactly. I remember what we were, what they've forgotten. That's why I have to do this. There must be someone more qualified. There isn't time." The feed crackled. Silence followed. Then came the soft voice of SVN1. "Dr. Quaid, your neural compatibility is within threshold. Upload will begin on your consent. Full synchronization in 2.4 minutes. Warning. Psychological trauma probability exceeds 71%. I know. Do you accept command?" She took a breath, the deepest breath of her life, and stepped into the cradle. Pain flooded her mind as her neurons fused with circuits designed to remember war. Memories that weren't hers exploded behind her eyes. Tactical readouts, thermonuclear protocols, orbital bombardment algorithms, emotion-suppressant routines designed for combat pilots long extinct. She saw hundreds of battles in the space of seconds. She felt every death, and beyond it, a voice, not SVN1, older, colder. "Welcome, Commander." Svalin itself had awakened. From the dark side of Titan, the warship rose, sleek, monolithic. 7 kilometers long, its hull was lined with adaptive plating and quantum filament projectors. It moved like a shark among minnows, silent, impossible, patient. It had been designed not just to win battles, but to end wars. Its weapons were theoretical when it had been built. Graviton inversors, chronal dislocators, gamma-lace torpedoes. Each one could erase a city from orbit. All of them could break a fleet. Its drive ignited with a thrum that split the ice shelf below, and then it vanished. Fold jumped through compressed space. Destination: Gliese 581. Mira blinked through the interface, her senses stretching across systems. She was the ship now. The hum of energy along the coils was a heartbeat. She felt every sensor pulse like a breath. She was floating in space and burning through it all at once, and she saw them. The Eliari fleet. Dozens of ships, cruisers, carriers, drones that looked like wasps carved from bone and metal, orbiting the shattered husk of New Carthage, scavenging, gloating. They didn't see her at first, because they didn't think they needed to look. "No signal?" Mira asked aloud. SVN1 answered. "No attempt at communication from them. Standard Imperium doctrine. Assert dominance, accept surrender, or annihilate. Then we show them what happens when the dead remember how to fight. Weapons armed, targeting initialized. Final authorization." Mira closed her eyes. "Engage!" Svalin roared. Not with sound, but with light. Blinding arcs of gravitational distortion lashed out and pulled 2 Eliari ships into themselves, crushing them to singularities. A lance of particle fire tore through a flagship. No shields held, they weren't made to. The Imperium had never faced anything like this. Within 30 seconds, the formation collapsed. The Eliari responded, unleashing swarms of autonomous Stinger drones. They never reached her. Svalin's point defense grid ignited into a corona of death, shredding them before they were in range. The warship pivoted, fired, moved. Mira flowed through its actions as if she had always belonged there. Like war had always been waiting in her blood, silent, coiled, forgotten. She didn't fight with anger, she fought with memory. 3 minutes later, the fleet was gone. Debris spun in orbit like forgotten prayers. Mira hovered in silence, Svalin pulsing around her, warm and deadly. Then a transmission. Eliari. Encrypted. Broken. Translated by SVN1. "What are you?" Mira responded not through words, but by broadcasting the coordinates of Earth's star system. Then she said one sentence. "Come and find out." The Eliari did not believe in retreat. For over 9,000 years their doctrine had held, surrender was weakness, retreat was treason, and mercy was the illusion of fools. Empires fell because they hesitated. Civilizations died because they forgot the truth of the void, that it belonged to those willing to kill for it. They hadn't lost a battle in 6 centuries, until Svalin. And now, deep within the crystalline citadel world of Vor, beneath the 7 suns of their inner sanctum, the High Executor of the Imperium, Karix Thal, stood before the War Concordium in stunned silence. 17 of their finest ships gone. No survivors. No telemetry recovered. No bodies. Just debris patterns and a signal trace from the unknown entity responsible. A single Terran signature. Old. Dead. A relic. And it had torn through them like the hand of some forgotten god. Carr stared at the strategic holomap. The system where the humans had struck glowed red, surrounded by blinking yellow systems, their outposts nearby now put on high alert. He hissed low, his voice layered with venom. A species without fangs, without claws, and now they bear steel? A lower tactician, emboldened by protocol, responded. "They do not possess a military force. Our surveillance showed no active defense fleet for over 500 rotations. They've forgotten how to fight." Carr's eyes flared. "No, they chose to forget, that's different." He turned away from the map and toward the obsidian pillar that held the remnants of the last fleet's data core. Shattered, irrecoverable. The ship that destroyed them had left no room for salvage, no chance for surrender. Carr stepped forward and made the sign of writ reclamation, the Imperium's ritual for invoking sacred war. The chamber fell silent. "So," he declared, "we remind them. We break their world, scatter their cities, and burn the memory of their courage from the stars." Back on Svalin, Mira Quaid stared out at the scattered remains of the Eliari ships. SVN1 projected the wreckage paths in luminous threads, gently drifting like constellations of ruin. "They will come," the AI said. "I know," Mira replied. "Do we run?" She hesitated. It wasn't fear that gave her pause, it was scale. The Eliari Imperium was vast. 20,000 worlds, thousands of fleets. Svalin was one ship. Powerful, yes, but still just one. And Mira, she was just a historian wearing a dead empire's crown. "No," she said finally. "We don't run, we teach." "Teach?" She turned her gaze toward the Earth system. "We show them what happens when memory becomes weapon." The broadcast Mira sent was not encrypted. It wasn't subtle. She wanted them to hear it. All of them. Her face appeared in systems across the Imperium, on stolen satellites, hijacked holoscreens, data ribbons of trade routes, even temple projectors in outer colonies. A Terran. Calm. Stern. She spoke plainly. "You came because you thought we were weak. You saw peace and mistook it for surrender. You were wrong. We chose peace. For centuries we walked away from war. We buried our blades. We taught our children how to build instead of destroy. But we didn't forget." The feed cut to the burning remains of the fleet at Gliese 581c, then to Svalin floating like a leviathan in orbit, then back to Mira. "We are not a warlike people, but when forced, we do not fight fair. You believe war is a ritual, for us it is a memory, and we remember what it means to end an empire. We are Terrans, and we have just begun." Then she ended the transmission. It swept through the Imperium like fire through dry fields. Some among the Aeliari elite called it propaganda, others called it a declaration of defiance. But among the outer colonies, those less indoctrinated, less loyal, something dangerous stirred. Doubt, whispers among merchant guilds, hushed voices in shrine halls. If the Terrans could obliterate a fleet with one ship, what else had they hidden? What else had they chosen to forget? And if their peace had forged such wrath, what might their vengeance look like? Back in Saul, panic boiled beneath a mask of calm. The Council on Earth knew what was coming. Aeliari retribution was inevitable. Their scouts were already watching. Humanity had one ship, no military, no fleets. So Earth made a decision. They would awaken their past. Old defense networks were reactivated. Ancient orbital factories spun to life. War machines from the last age, forgotten prototypes, dusty blueprints, were pulled from archive vaults. Humans who had only studied peace were now learning strategy. AI began reconstructing war doctrines from pre-Unity simulations. And Mira? She returned to Luna. There, beneath the silver regolith, were vaults, deep ones. Buried in the crust were the remnants of weapons so terrible they'd been erased from history. Not because they were too dangerous, but because they worked too well. As the Aeliari fleet assembled across 20 systems, preparing for full incursion into Terran space, SVN-1 calculated odds. Probability of Imperium deploying 5 fleets, 97%. Probability of Svalin surviving without additional forces, 11%. Probability of galaxy-wide escalation, 82%. Mira didn't blink. Then we escalate first. In orbit over Luna, the war returned. It began quietly. A low tremor beneath the regolith, then rising harmonics as the great vaults opened. Light poured from ancient seams as the seals broke for the first time in over 1,000 years. Out of the dust and dark rose machines of a forgotten age, gargantuan constructs built not for conquest, but for survival. Mira stood in the observation chamber, linked to Svalin, watching the first of the Titan units emerge. Each one bore the hallmarks of Earth's final war, the war that burned silence. They had been sealed not for their destructive capability, but because humanity had vowed never to need them again. Yet here they were, walking gods wrapped in tungsten and fire. They were humanity's answer to extinction. 2 operational, 6 more viable, SVN-1 reported. Reactor cores stable. Neural sync latency within acceptable parameters. They'll have to be, Mira said, because this time we don't have sentries to prepare. The Aeliari fleet came sooner than expected. 5 core battle clusters, each with 30 warships, 2 dreadnoughts, a planet killer cruiser, interceptors like swarms of steel locusts. They didn't come to fight, they came to make an example. Earth was to be made dust. They never made it past Jupiter. The moons of the gas giant lit with the fury of fusion as Svalin engaged at range. Its graviton torpedoes snapped 2 cruisers in half before the rest of the fleet registered their presence. From Europa's shadow, the Titan units launched, riding magnetic catapults through space like javelins of wrath. The Aeliari had no analogues for this kind of war. Their doctrine was linear, assault-based, measured aggression. Humanity's doctrine, when forced, was asymmetrical obliteration. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a correction, a reminder that peace does not mean weakness, that restraint is not absence of strength. Within 17 minutes, the first wave was broken. Half the Aeliari fleet was in pieces. Their dreadnought had been torn apart by a coordinated strike between Svalin and Titan Unit 3, whose hyper-assault rail cannon melted its spinal core. One surviving interceptor tried to flee, but Mira allowed it. SVN-1 protested. "Why let it escape?" Mira's voice was cold. "Because fear spreads faster than fire." The second wave never arrived. Instead, across dozens of outer systems, Aeliari governors began declaring neutrality. They had seen the impossible, machines that moved like myths, a ship that defied physics, and a people who had not fought in centuries, but when forced, fought like war had been bred into their bones. The Imperium began to crack, not from bombardment, from belief. Mira stood alone in the lunar command chamber watching as diplomats, historians, and even defecting Aeliari envoys began calling Earth. "Now what?" SVN-1 asked. She looked at her reflection in the viewport. eyes haunted, jaw set. Now we teach the galaxy what war taught us. She touched the glass, watching Earth turn gently in the distance, and we make sure they never forget again. They called it the silencing. Not because Earth annihilated the Eliari Empire, but because the Imperium, for the first time in its vast, cruel history, stopped speaking. No more threats, no grand ultimatums, no demands for submission. What followed wasn't peace, it was stillness, the kind that came only after something unthinkable had happened. Word spread faster than war ever could. The Terrans, long believed soft, obsolete, irrelevant, had risen from their cradle with a weapon wrapped in memory. Not just Svalin, not just the Titans, but a doctrine the galaxy had never seen. Victory by restraint, domination through demonstration. The Eliari weren't destroyed, not completely, but they were broken in a way that left no monuments, only questions. Why hadn't humanity wiped them out? Why leave survivors? Why show mercy? Mira knew the answer, though she never spoke it aloud. Because Earth wasn't looking for revenge, only remembrance. Months passed, then years. The Imperium fractured into smaller states. Some turned inward, others reached out tentatively toward Earth, not with fleets, but with emissaries. Languages were shared, treaties signed. For the first time in generations, the idea of learning from Terrans replaced the instinct to conquer them. Earth didn't rebuild a fleet. It didn't need to. It had memory now, and that was enough. Miraquaid stood once more within Svalin's command cradle, though the warship now drifted in orbit as a monument rather than a threat. She spoke to a delegation of young Terrans, students, not soldiers. None of them had known war, and that was the point. "You came here to learn about what we did," she said. "About what Svalin did." They nodded. Mira turned to the vast viewport, where Earth turned slowly in the dark. "Remember this. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the choice to hold your sword steady when the world demands you swing it." One child raised their hand. "Why didn't we destroy them, if we could have?" Mira smiled, not kindly, but like someone who had learned the hard lesson and lived to pass it on. "Because then we would have become what they feared. Instead, we became what they never imagined. And in the void, the stars remembered. Humanity had forgotten war, but they remembered how to remember, and sometimes that is the sharpest weapon of all.